A conversation osobola omanya n'okuyiga ye intention ati wali talina recognition nga tabavubuka bamukola tulina mission ati kati girabe nga platform egenda okuteeka artist gwe ku form sibya kubuuza mbuno gwe owasa ddi abnormal interviews babuuza ofumbiddwa ddi ati nga bw'owuliriza eno ye interview dakiika zibeera 10 zokka temuba interview ati teka kuola beba storytellers saako n'abava mu kisaawe ekyono ati nga bw'owuliriza eno ye interview dakiika zibeera 10 zokka temuba interview ati teka kuola beba storytellers saako n'abava mu kisaawe ekyono ati.
Right? And by then, you remember the libraries, I was in Kitante Primary School, so we have these libraries with just academic books. And she sent us novels of Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, and I can never ever forget them. So what I used to do is I used to go home, finish the books, and then you share them around. Yeah, you share the books around, and then I used to actually like rewrite the stories and always make myself the heroine, you know? Because Hardy Boys were 2 boys and Nancy Drew like fighting crime. And I enjoyed that so much. Then I would come to school and force my friends to listen to my version before I actually gave them my copies of the stories. But then eventually they started to listen and they really started to enjoy it to the point that they were asking like, write more, you know? And I think I've always wanted to tell stories, like tell or edit. So for me, why writing? Because it gives us a chance to like rewrite things in our own perspective, and that's very important for me. This year for the first time I was in a play not as a writer but acting it, and it was a 1-woman play, 1 hour and 30 minutes. Now, I've always wanted to do acting. You know, like everyone has that secret dream that they want. I've always wanted to do acting, and I always assumed that it's an easy storytelling, you know, because you tell stories, right? Just in front of a crowd. And I'd done comedy before and public speaking, so I assumed it would be something I could easily do. It was the most challenging thing I've ever done to date. First of all, the story was quite difficult. Well, the story was about this young girl, you know, who's remembering or retelling her story with an older white man in Uganda. Now, we all know those financial dynamics, yeah? But apart from that, it also gets more difficult. I mean, the play is now done, I can talk about it. Like, she ends up revealing about an abortion that she had and going through those dynamics. And it did something to my side, you know? First of all, like, also, I was rehearsing every day in front of an audience, you know? The thing about writing is it's very isolated and you do it in private. So by the time someone sees your mistakes, you're like on edit 5 or 16, right? Theatre is all happening on the stage, whether it's in front of a director or someone with lights. And also, I didn't realize this, but writing is quite egotistical. It's my story, I want to tell it my own way. When it comes to theatre, it's the writer's story, first of all, the director's story, the sound guy, and all these things. I think it was really difficult, but also one of the most rewarding things. So I keep telling people, as a writer, whether you're writing for print or radio or stage or screen, you have to expand your experiences, you know? Because I've done like film, not for film, I've done mostly like producing, then audio, like writing scripts. I used to be a journalist before. And to understand each medium, I did need something from the other one, like experiment. I went in there, I actually thought it was a volunteer role for theatre, but it taught me so much about storytelling, about the vulnerability of a character. And the play was so well written by Doreen Bangana. Yeah, it was an adaptation. It was so well written that you don't have to, a lot of our writing, you know, I don't want to say our writing, a lot of writing these days is like tell, like, you know, drumming how the character is feeling. But sometimes you can just use a subtle movement, like, you know, her fidgeting on stage to show exactly what she's feeling internally. So I'm really excited. It was the first time. I think it was really frightening, but it was really beautiful. For me as a writer, also for me who works in producing, to know how people are feeling in front of the camera, in front of public, yeah. In 2018, I needed to crowdfund for my 2nd year of tuition for the Masters of Creative Writing. And my challenge was that I had already done one crowdfunding before to get £10,000 for tuition. So how was I going to do this a second time? I was embarrassed, I was cautious, and also it was the first time I had written like publicly for the world, like this is my story. So anyway, I decided, it was my birthday on August 27th. I decided, a friend of mine asked me, what do you want to do for your birthday? I said I wanted to wear a wedding dress. Initially, this was as a mockery for everyone who was always asking me, when are you getting married? When are you getting kids? You're there studying. So it was a response to that. And then, you know, my brother made a cake and then someone did a speech. But as I was doing that, I realized that actually I got that idea to crowdfund. I said, this is exactly like the value we place on weddings. If I had been there and I said, please crowdfund for my wedding, I would have gotten all that money. But saying crowdfund for a scholarship to study wouldn't have been the same, you know. So I used that idea, the gimmick of marriage, to kind of like, you know, with my wedding dress, I went online, I made a second crowdfunding, and that's how I was able to raise tuition for the second year. Now, the benefit of that, apart from the fact that I went to school, is I still use it on my CV. You know, like it's literally at the top. For example, with writing, I do different kinds of writing, not just my personal writing. So if I'm applying for a job in media, for example, I can say this is how I can do social media engagement, this is how I can crowdfund. And the challenge of writing, personally, which I've seen with myself and other writers, is the ego. You know, you write one story, it's like, why haven't they liked my story? I submitted it to this fellowship. You know, who has read your? First of all, we send our writing to friends. That is good, but also the worst way to have yourself edited. Send to a fellow writer. Secondly, all the writers that, not all of them, most of the writers we admire have been writing for years, and they have so many edits, you know. So the frustrating thing is we get impatient with it. For me, the solution that I've come up with is this triangle. So I decided for my own self, there's a triangle of writing. There's writing I do for money, which is like NGO writing. Someone wants a business plan. You may not like it, but that's what pays the bills. Then there's your personal writing, and someone may say, oh, but I'm earning from my personal writing, but keep it as your personal writing, because once you start thinking about it as a source of money, you get frustrated with it. Every time you go down to the computer or to the book to write, you're like, I can't do this because, you know, if you don't get money, then your writing is invalidated. Then the writing for networking. I think as a writer, you have to have all those three. And that's like, for example, are you volunteering? Are you, you know, like reaching out to networks? Are you expanding? It's all these things, but that's the challenge I find personally with writing, is that it's a lot more than that story that people see, you know? There's so much that goes around, and sometimes it's frustrating, especially in our community, where it's not quite valued. I think for me personally, one of the biggest roles of writing in society is that it helps us to document and challenge social injustices. You know, for example, as a writer and a reader, there are some things I've only found about because someone else has written about. And I remember, like in Idi Amin's era, like there was a lot of political strife, and people fought back by like putting on these theater plays, which seemed like very normal, but they actually told the experiences of the normal Ugandan and what they were going through. And so I think, and in our generation now, people are writing digitally, you know, even just by tweeting or Facebook. It's about to challenge oppression, for example. How would I want society to look at me as a writer? I remember when I did my undergraduate course, I had a lecturer who told me I have to decide if I'm a Ugandan writer or a writer of Ugandan stories. And that has always, I always tell the story, like, are you, you know, so for me that story is very important, because as a writer of Ugandan stories, you transcend all, you know, like expectations, you know, you have an experience that you want to put across. As a Ugandan writer, maybe you can limit your audience, and you can limit the way you tell the stories, you know. He said neither of which is bad. But as a Ugandan writer, if my view is like this, you know, then that's all I'm going to see. But how do I write my story and someone in Russia understands a point about, for example, I don't know, feminism or love or anything, you know, politics, by just hearing a Ugandan story? So a writer of Ugandan stories. Now, in short, no one is going to respect you as a writer. That is something I gave up, and that is something I embrace. And actually, when I go into meetings, sometimes I'll just walk in, and then people will dismiss you until you start talking, hopefully, you know. But like, we need to also not put too much weight on our writing. Like, what do people see us as? Because we chose a non-conventional route. You know, we chose, like, otherwise we would be in offices from 8 to 5. But we chose this route. We chose to wake up, you know, at 12 or 11. We chose to be up at 2 doing some work. And I think I'm kind of my writing now and my process. My border man is my biggest critic. So it's like, when Sandra, when you should see, yo, Paula D, you've been at home for these days. You know, he's always criticizing me for the way I dress, the way I look. He doesn't understand that I can be in the house for a week and I'm working. But also, I don't have to justify myself to him, you know? So we need to really stop justifying ourselves to people. Because it's very, very frustrating to be a writer in Uganda.